Onko se, Pirjo, niin, että me ei päästä yhtään reissua tekemään ilman Sotamuseota?
Näin se on. Kyllä jokaisen reissun vähintään yksi Sotamuseo täytyy kuulua.
Joo, ja mä veikkaan, että tällä reissulla tulee vielä muitakin.
Joo, mutta se on ihan kiva mennä välillä ranskalaiseen Sotamuseoon, kun on käyty nyt saksalaisissa ja hollantilaisissa. Tämä huikean hieno Turckheimin sotamuseo sijaitsee noin 7 kilometriä Colmarista länteenpäin. Eli samalla reissulla helppo käydä, kun käy Colmarissa. Ja tämän paikan osoite näkyy tuossa kuvaruudulla juuri nyt. Kesäkaudella eli kesäkuusta syyskuuhun tämä on auki maanantaista perjantaihin kello 14-18 ja lauantaina ja sunnuntaina 10-12 ja 14-18. Ja talvikaudella aukioloajat ovat hieman suppeammat, eli kannattaa tarkistaa netistä, että milloin tämä on auki. Ja lipun hinta oli 6 euroa per henkilö, ja oli niin hieno museo, että oli kyllä varmasti sen hinnan väärti.
Siinä on aika iso tykki, 105 milliä ja kantavuus yli 11 kilometriä.
Katselemme tässä ensin hieman tätä ulkoaluetta ja sen jälkeen menemme tuonne museon sisälle. Ja meillä oli hieno mahdollisuus saada tämä museon opas esittelemään meille museota. Eli tuossa tällä videolla näkyy pätkiä, jossa tämä museon pitäjä, museon opas esittelee meille erilaisia esineitä ja kertoo sitä tarinaa ja historiaa niistä esineistä. Ja koska hän on täältä kotoisin ja hän tuntee tätä aluetta, niin hän tietää todella paljon tarinoita näiden esineiden takaa. Ja koska hän esittelee nämä englannin kielellä, niin laitan sitten tekstityksen niihin kohtiin niin kuin suomenkielisenä, että mistä siinä puhutaan. Tämä museo käsittelee hyvin paljon sitä, millaista elämä täällä Alsassin alueella sodan aikana oli. Ja lisäksi tietenkin niitä vaiheita, kun tätä aluetta vapautettiin natsien vallasta. Tuossa seinällä oleva taulu muistelee sitä päivää 4. helmikuuta 1945, jolloin tämä Turckheim vapautettiin. Mutta luonnollisestikin sotatoimet saksalaisia vastaan täällä Alsassin alueella alkoivat jo aiemmin. Eli 14. marraskuuta 1944 alkoi täällä liittoutuneiden hyökkäys. Ja 21. marraskuuta 1944 pystyttiin vapauttamaan Mulhouse, eli se, missä käytiin siellä junamuseossa, joka oli siis tästä etelää. Strasbourg vapautettiin marraskuun 23. päivä, ja noiden myötä tänne Colmarin ympärille muodostui sitten niin sanottu Colmarin tasku, eli saksalaisen vastarinnan pesäke. Joulukuussa liittoutuneet etenivät jonkun verran täällä ja valtasivat joitakin kyliä. Mutta sitten joulukuun lopussa 1944 Strasbourgin suunnasta tuli haasteita ja kenraali Eisenhower olisi halunnut luopua asemistaan ja siirtää linjansa taaemmaksi. Tammikuun 2. päivä 1945 sitten Versaillesissa pidettiin konferenssi ja sinne osallistui Eisenhower, Charles de Gaulle ja Winston Churchill. Ja siellä todettiin, että Strasbourgin kaupunkia puolustetaan. Ja 20. tammikuuta 1945 sitten lähdettiin uuteen hyökkäykseen. Ja tammikuun 27. päivä saavuttiin Colmarin kanavalle. Mutta taistelut jatkui vielä tuonne helmikuun puolelle, eli Colmar vapautettiin helmikuun 2. päivä ja tämä Turckheim, jossa tämä museo on, sitten helmikuun 4. päivä. Ja 9. helmikuuta nämä Colmarin taskun viimeisetkin saksalaiset luovuttivat ja kenraali de la Trée ilmoitti Colmarin taskun taistelun päättyneen. Eli tämä alue oli se viimeinen alue Ranskassa, missä käytiin toisen maailmansodan taisteluita. Ja seuraavaksi sitten kuunnellaan, mitä meidän oppaamme kertoo tästä museosta ja sen esineistöstä.
This bread is coming from Kaisersberg, which is a village close to this place, about 30 minutes from here. And it was a guy actually who kept it as a souvenir. We don't really know why. Maybe that was, a core memory of the time where they were starving and they didn't have much food. So, he just kept it for 80 years and brought it to the museum one day and said, "Hey, I have this old bread. Do you want it?" And we were like, "A bread from like the war?" And he said, yeah, he kept it, he kept the pumpernickel, and before he gave it to the museum, you see that it's missing a part, and so it wasn't cut with the knife you see next to it, of course not, because this bread is rock hard. He had to use a metal saw to actually cut a piece that he still keeps as a souvenir of his bread from 80 years ago. That's how it ended up here at the museum. And you also see you have the ration cards that the Germans would give to the people here. For example, this one is actually for bread. You see that it's written 500 grams brot. And you have to know that not everyone was allowed to have them. So I know that from my grandma who taught me this story, is that so depending on if you were, self-sufficient, if you had, for example, farm animals, the Germans would say, okay, if you have that, you're not allowed to have those cards. On the other side, if you didn't have that, if you didn't have any animals or something, if you were very poor, then you were allowed to have those cards. So you see that there's a difference between the two parts of my family. One part had farm animals, so they were struggling but still had animals, and on the other side, from my grandpa's side, for example, their family had to struggle more, and especially for food it was very hard to provide it because the bridge that was for the city got exploited by the Germans, and so they had to go on the next village to try and get some crumbs of food. That's the story. The thing with this museum is that all the objects you see in this museum have their own little story. We're trying to explain to people that the war, it's not only about weapons, about uniforms, and like the good and the evil ones. It's also about little objects from your daily life that can really also explain a lot about how people actually lived through this period. And spoiler, in room 2 you will see another very unique objects that you don't really see normally in World War II museums, but that's for next episode. This is a riding horse that is very unique because you don't usually see this in World War II museums, because why would we put that in here? Well, it is actually related to the liberation of the Como pocket, because this was made by a father for his children that you see here in the picture. So the father, he built that for his children so that it could play outside with it, but he added a little detail. He painted it with the French colors, with the French flag. You see, you have blue, white, and red. And context, during World War II, Alsace was German. Therefore, if you get caught with anything related to the French side, it can end up pretty bad for you. It can go from death to concentration camp, whatever, you name it. The Nazis were very imaginative when it came to punishments. So, they would do that, and by knowing actually that, there was a risk that if they get caught, things might end up bad. But still, the children loved it. They would play with it every time. And one day, their worst fear appeared, a German soldier. And they thought, oh Lord, we're done, we're gonna die. But the reaction of that soldier was quite different from what they expected. It was a young guy who literally, he was not interested anymore in fighting. And so he had deserted the army. So when he saw that horse, he had this expression where he said, "Ach, was für ein schönes Pferd! What a beautiful horse you have!" And so he was actually, amused by it, and he knew exactly the message behind. He was not dumb, but, since he had deserted and that it was the end of the war, he knew, that everything was cooked for the German side, so he couldn't care less, actually. And so he stayed a little bit with the family. The children were still allowed to play with that horse. It never actually budged by an inch. It was still in the garden. And so the German soldier actually had to leave at some point because, of course, if he gets caught, well, it ends up bad. So he left the family, and this horse actually survived all the end of the war, and even today, that's why it's here. And one of the children, which was now, of course, very old, he heard about our museum, and so he asked us if we were interested by this horse, and we said, well, yeah, sure, because it has a very unique story. And so he, with his family, had a very unique visit of the museum, a tour of the museum, and he was very proud to show his horse on display, he was, yeah, that's why it's here. He sadly passed away not so long ago, but at least his memory is still, alive with this horse, so that's why it's here, And all the different mannequins you see, those 3 different children have their own story as well. And what is interesting, when you come to visit our museum, take the time to flash the QR codes you see everywhere in the museum. There are some small QR codes that you can flash, and then it opens you a page where you have all the different stories about all the objects, all the soldiers and everything of the different sides. So really take the time, to just enjoy those stories, because all the stories are very unique. And I think you're gonna love it here. So that was coming from an American soldier who, well, let's say, had a lot of relationships during the war. And so he would write down all the names and places of living and phone number of all the different ladies he actually dated during, World War II. So not only American ladies, but also French ones, German ones. You can literally tell everywhere he was with all the names of the different ladies he encountered, and remember their names and all that. And which is very funny as well is that at the beginning and at the end of this little carnet, he also wrote that in case he lost it, he would love that someone would send it back to him. And so you have his whole address to where to send it and to who, because he was very attached to this. It's the Tinder from 80 years ago. There was no Facebook, there was no Instagram. This was it. This is how they would do that. So he was very attached to it.
And for the ladies that were young at that time, it would be interesting to read if their names existed.
I don't know what happened to all those ladies, and I don't think they knew that they were not the only one, but it's from a different time, And I usually, when I do my tours, I usually make fun of something that I have on the other side, which is, the Americans had a lot of hygiene products, and in those hygiene products, they had something quite weird, if you can say it. They had condoms. And then you ask me, why were there condoms? And it's not for what you think it is. It's, it was for protecting the weapons from getting wet. So they would put that on top of, their weapons to provide any humidity to go in it, because otherwise the weapon would be unusable, And so I like to joke around and say, officially, that's why they had condoms. Unofficially, I don't want to know what they did with it. Probably something like this, Or, when it's for children, when I'm doing a tour for children, I'm saying, what, maybe they did water balloons with it. Let's just say that.
Exactly.
But just it makes it very interesting to see, on the one side you have condoms, and on the other side you have this, and you're like, okay, we got it, There is a lot of bombs that would be made out of metal. That was the basic stuff. They would put it with metal, But to make it less detectable, they would also use other stuff, like wood, for example. You know, you have those landmines made out of wood, glass as well. So you see, it's very interesting because, as well, you cannot actually detect this type of explosive, and that's why it's quite, fascinating to see how people would think about that. And also sometimes they would even make them out of cardboard. This is not metal. This is cardboard painted in black.
Oh, that's interesting.
And it looks very realistic.
It looks like metal.
Yeah, but it's not. It's cardboard.
Oh.
Yeah, very fascinating, right? And so this is the big one for tanks, for example. Very deadly as well. Very dangerous. So nowadays when people still find stuff in the fields, because it still happens a lot, there's still a lot of findings, not only from World War II, but even before, from World War I, we still discover a lot, because obviously Alsace was a place of back and forth between France and Germany for a very long time. There's got a lot of fightings. And obviously, people still find a lot of things from World War I, from World War II. Even in my own garden, sometimes I find some tiny little artifacts. Nothing much, but like old coins and stuff like that. I think the oldest coin I found was actually from end of 19th century. Yeah. It was a Reichspfennig from, I think, 1890 something. So very fascinating, and it would just sit, I have a garden where I'm growing vegetables. And so sometimes you have coins just showing on top of vegetables. It's very funny, because I'm not, here in France, you're not allowed to metal detecting or anything. So it's by pure luck that I'm finding those things.
But if you find something like that, what is the process then?
Oh, obviously, if you find an explosive or something, you have to immediately call police. And so they will do a perimeter, and sometimes they're gonna make it explode on the place. And sometimes when it's possible, they're gonna, put it with them and just make it explode at somewhere else where there's nobody around, obviously. But it really depends on the explosive and if it's really dangerous or not. But it's, in any case, if you find something dangerous, do not touch it, do not play with it, do not try to do anything with it. Just, call the police and tell them, and they're gonna handle the rest for you. So really, it's important because there was a lot of victims, especially after the war, there was a lot of victims of the bombs and the grenades and all that. But still today, there are a few people that are still not understanding how dangerous those things could be.
And you need to tell the children that if you find something, don't touch them, I guess.
Yeah, because sometimes you still have children actually showing up at schools with that kind of stuff, and you're like, no, don't do that, please. Please do not flex to your friends with that type of thing, because it's really, really dangerous.
Exactly.
And you should always handle it with precaution. The mannequins are actually painted by an artist that was a French guy who worked in the cinema industry, and he's the one making those mannequins. He's painting them by hand.
Oh.
And that's why, some of them are so expressive.
Yeah.
Especially in the other room, you have a German soldier with the expression, just the expression, without me saying you that it's a German guy, you can tell that he's German, because he really has this very, frightening expression. And sometimes when I'm closing the museum, at night, I get scared because, I feel like, okay, he's in my back, so I get scared sometimes.
So he looks so real.
Yeah. I can show you after that, because he looks very real. But these two, they're very expressive, and that's something we're trying to do as much as we can here at the museum, is we're trying to reproduce as much as we can the different landscapes, the situations, the expression of the soldiers and all that. We really try to do as much, adding much detail as we can. Sometimes it's very, pushed to a really a big extent, let's say like that. This is an old barn from the Valley of Munster. They actually, it's a real one that it took down and rebuilt here in the museum to make this diorama. That's what I'm saying, when I'm talking about making it as real as possible, is that even the entire decor sometimes is the real one that the soldiers 80 years ago could actually encounter and live in. So yeah, also very fascinating.
Yeah, it's very well built, this scene.
And this is all made because this museum is 30 years old, and it all started with a project of 3 friends trying to do something about the Como Pocket, which is a battle that is still not very well known, even for us Alsatian. And so they had this project of doing an association where they could share the stories of, at this time, they were still survivor of that time. And after that, slowly but surely, we had the idea of doing this museum. And this place as well is actually very interesting because it's an ancient wine cellar from the 18th century. It's coming from the old presbytery from the city. So you see it especially in room 1. You have this very unique structure of the wine cellar, and it's historically accurate with the museum because during World War II it was used as a shelter for the inhabitants of Turckheim to hide from the bombs. So you have to imagine approximately, let's say 100 people would be down there every day, every night, sharing everything, even very not so funny things. And even the mass would take place down there. The Christmas mass of 1944-45 took place down there actually. And the priest would just put a little hotel in place and do the mass down there because it was too dangerous to do it in the church over there.
Yeah.
So that's why we're underground actually,
Oh yeah.
And that's the purpose, So it's it's related, not only the museum talks about World War II and what happened for the people here, but just the building itself also adds up to that place. So,
exactly, it's a real place of what happened.
Exactly, and that's why it makes it also very important, and you're immersed in what it was 80 years ago.
Oh, yeah. Tässä saimme kuulla aivan huikeita tarinoita, kun nämä tarinat ovat näille tämän alueen asukkaille aivan täyttä totta. Eli kotiseutu tarkoittaa täällä myös paikkaa, jossa on sota runnellut ympäristöä mennen tullen ja ihmiset ovat joutuneet elämään sen kanssa. Ja aivan huikeata oli myös nähdä ja kuulla, kuinka sydämellä tätä museota on rakennettu. Nyt sitten seuraavaksi kerron teille suomen kielellä tarinan, jonka tämä meidän oppaamme myös meille kertoi, ja se liittyi keskitysleiriin, joka on ollut tuossa Strasbourgin lähellä, eli ei kovin pitkän matkan päässä tästä. Ja se on kyllä kauhistuttava tarina, niin kuin keskitysleiritarinat ovat. Eli täällä on siis keskitysleiri tällä alueella, ja on olemassa toisaalta tämmöisiä keskitysleirejä, jotka on vähän niin kuin työleirejä, ja sitten on toisaalta olemassa tuhoamisleirejä. No se täällä oleva keskitysleiri, niin se ei ole tuhoamisleiri periaatteessa, se on periaatteessa työleiri. Mutta siellä on semmoinen pieni erillinen kaasukammio-osio, joka on siellä sen takia, että sehän on lähellä Strasbourgia. Ja Strasbourgin yliopistossa oli semmoinen professori, joka opetti anatomiaa. Ja sitten kun hän oli hirveän innokas anatomian opettaja, niin hän halusi pystyä näyttämään opiskelijoille, miten juutalaisen keho, luusto ja muu rakenne eroaa muista, siis arjalaisista. No sitten kun kävi niin, että täällä alueella ei enää ollut juutalaisia, joita hän olisi voinut sitten leikellä ja esitellä näille oppilailleen, niin sitten hän tilasi, vähän niin kuin Amazonista tilataan materiaalia, niin hän tilasi Auschwitzista ikään kuin materiaalia. Eli hän tilasi sieltä muutamia kymmeniä juutalaisia, jotta hän sitten pystyi ne, siellä hänellä oli pieni kaasukammio, ihan tätä varten rakennettu. Ja tosiaan, että hän sitten pystyi siellä kaasukammiossa ne kaasuttamaan, ei voinut siis ampua, koska jos ampuu, niin ei jää niin hyvän rakenteesta sitä ruumista jäljelle, joten ne kaasutettiin ne ihmiset. Ja sitten tämä kyseinen professori, anatomian professori, sitten leikkeli niitä sopiviin paloihin, jotta hän pystyi kouluttamaan omia opiskelijoitaan. Siis näyttämään, että minkälainen on juutalaisen rakenne. Ihan kauhistuttava tarina. Ja silloin kun sitten Strasbourg vapautettiin, se oli vuonna 1944, jossain ymmärtääkseni, olikohan se loppuvuonna, niin sitten amerikkalaiset löysi tämän kyseisen laboratorion.
Tuolla englanninkielisen osion alussa tässä videolla tämä meidän oppaamme esitteli sitä 80 vuotta vanhaa leipää. Ja koska siihen sen taustaan liittyi vielä ihan hauska tarina, niin laitan senkin vielä tähän loppuun, niin ehkä se keventää tunnelmaa keskitysleiritunnelmista vähän iloisempiin asioihin.
Tämä leipä tässä, mikä näkyy tuossa ikkunassa, niin se on ihan aitoa leipää, siis ihan todellista leipää. Ei ole mikään tehty leipä, ja se on 80 vuotta vanha leipä. Ja siihen liittyy se tarina, että sitä sanotaan Pumpernickel nimellä, jossa tämä jälkimmäinen Nickel oli Napoleonin hevonen. Ja se nimi tulee siitä, että kun se oli niin pahaa, että sotilaat oli sitä mieltä, että sitä voi syöttää korkeintaan hevoselle. Ja siitä tuli sen nimi. Ja kun siihen aikaanhan viljaa ei ollut, siis se oli tosi harvinaista ja kallista, niin tämä on ymmärtääkseni jonkin sortin pettuleipää. Täällä varmaan kuitenkin tehdään ihan erilaisesta puusta, mutta että hän selitti just sitä, että tämäkin on tehty sillä, että puusta on saatu jotain aineesta, joka on sitten jauhettu ja siitä tehty leipää. Ja se on ihan kivikova, mutta se ei ole yhtään homehtunut. Mutta toisaalta se on ihan kivikova, ettei sitä kyllä syödä enää voisi.
Tämä erikoisjakso liittyi ensi perjantaina julkaistavaan matkavideoon, jossa ajamme täältä Turckheimin kautta, mutta ajamme sitten myös Rikuevir-nimiseen paikkaan ja sitten Gleborgiin, johon majoitumme seuraavaksi 3 yöksi. Suuret kiitokset kaikille katsojille.